Harlem, New York, 1932. In the middle of the Great Depression, when hunger lines stretch across city blocks and faith in American institutions is already crumbling, a single investigation drops like a bombshell. According to explosive records obtained by the New York Herald, law and order in Harlem no longer belong to the state, the courts, or the people. They belong to one man. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, just 27 years old, has allegedly achieved something no criminal should ever be able to do. He has purchased the entire machinery of justice. Police officers, judges, and politicians, sworn to uphold the law, are revealed to be quietly collecting envelopes of cash, month after month, in exchange for protection, silence, and loyalty. This is not a story about a few crooked cops. This is a story about a neighborhood where democracy itself has been converted into a private business, where justice has a price tag, and where the line between government and organized crime has completely disappeared. Tonight, we are going to follow the paper trail, the ledgers, and the testimony that exposed how Harlem's institutions were sold from the inside out and why stopping this system may have been nearly impossible from the moment it was built. Harlem, New York. In early 1932, reporters at the New York Herald receive a package they were never supposed to see. Inside are financial records, payment schedules, and first-hand testimony from confidential sources, documents that expose the true scale of corruption, gripping Harlem's law enforcement and political system. At the center of it all is Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, a 27-year-old criminal figure whose empire had already been documented in a previous investigation. But what these new records reveal goes far beyond street crime or illegal gambling. According to the evidence, Johnson is paying approximately $500,000 every single year in systematic bribes to those tasked with enforcing the law. 427 police officers, 23 judges, and 47 political officials. These are not occasional payoffs slipped under tables. These are structured, recurring cash payments that transform public servants into salaried employees of a criminal organization. Officers who should be shutting down illegal gambling instead protect it. Judges who should deliver justice instead dismiss cases or reduce sentences. Politicians who should represent Harlem's residents instead use their influence to shield Johnson's operations. The documents make one thing unmistakably clear: this is not a handful of corrupt individuals acting alone. This is an entire system, purchased wholesale, where Harlem's government no longer serves its people, but serves the man who can pay the most. And for the first time, there is written proof that shows exactly how deep this corruption runs. What makes this scandal impossible to dismiss is not rumor or speculation, but paper, hundreds of pages of it. The records obtained by the New York Herald include handwritten ledgers meticulously maintained between January 1930 and September 1932, documenting every single bribe paid by Johnson's organization. The source of these documents is a disgruntled insider from within the operation itself, someone with direct access to the financial machinery that kept Harlem under control. The ledgers do not use names. Police officers are identified by badge numbers, judges by court assignments, politicians by district codes. At first glance, it looks deliberately opaque, but investigators cross-reference payment dates, amounts, and assignments with official rosters, quietly confirming identities through confidential sources inside the police department and Harlem's political circles. What emerges is not chaos, but order. The payment system is so precise it mirrors the accounting standards of a legitimate corporation. Monthly schedules, fixed rates, clear hierarchies, from low-ranking patrol officers to precinct captains, from municipal judges to criminal court judges, everyone has a price, and everyone is paid on time. These ledgers prove that corruption in Harlem is not spontaneous or opportunistic. It is engineered. It is planned, budgeted, and enforced. And once this system is in place, it does not merely tolerate corruption, it depends on it. The records show a criminal empire that understands one brutal truth. Controlling the streets is meaningless unless you also control the courts, the police stations, and the politicians who decide what justice even means. The ledgers reveal that corruption inside Harlem's police force is not random. It is organized by rank, authority, and usefulness. Every officer assigned to the 5 precincts covering Harlem is slotted into a payment structure designed to ensure total compliance. At the bottom are patrol officers, the men walking the streets, answering calls, and witnessing crime firsthand. According to the records, each patrol officer receives $50 per month, delivered in cash on the first day of every month. It may sound modest, but during the Depression, that money often exceeds what an officer earns officially. In exchange, officers ignore policy runners and collectors, provide 15-minute advance warnings before raids, arrest competitors on pretextual charges, and quietly refuse to investigate crimes committed against Johnson's rivals. Above them are sergeants, paid $150 per month, tasked with supervising patrol officers and ensuring discipline within the corruption system. They decide which officers provide intelligence, which honest cops are isolated, and which incidents are quietly erased from reports. Lieutenants, receiving $400 per month, control investigative resources. They make sure detectives assigned to cases involving Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson conduct weak, superficial investigations that lead nowhere. At the top are precinct captains, paid $2,500 per month, the highest police payments in the entire network. These men control raid schedules, personnel assignments, and what information reaches higher authorities or federal agencies. They ensure raids are announced days in advance, honest officers are reassigned, and police resources are even used to track and undermine rival criminals. In just one precinct, the 28th, this system costs nearly $190,000 per year, and the same structure is replicated across Harlem. The result is devastating. Police officers no longer protect citizens. They protect the criminal empire that pays them. And for the first time, the ledgers show exactly how every badge, from the street to the captain's office, was bought. The ledgers do not only record who took the money, they also expose what happened to the few who refused it. Out of the 427 police officers assigned to Harlem, approximately 63 officers attempted to remain honest, declining Johnson's payments despite knowing the risk. What followed was not subtle. These officers were systematically marginalized, punished, and pushed to the edge of survival. They were assigned to the worst posts, isolated foot patrols in dangerous areas, or meaningless desk duty that kept them away from the streets. When they responded to incidents involving Johnson's organization, backup mysteriously never arrived. Calls for assistance went unanswered, teaching a brutal lesson. Enforcing the law was not just futile, it was dangerous. Internal affairs offered no protection. Complaints were quietly buried by corrupt supervisors. Some officers were transferred to undesirable precincts. Others were targeted with fabricated disciplinary charges designed to end their careers. And when institutional pressure wasn't enough, personal threats followed. Anonymous warnings appeared. Phone calls hinted at harm to families. Johnson's organization demonstrated intimate knowledge of officers' home addresses, routines, even their children's schools. The message was clear: resistance would not be tolerated. The ledgers document multiple cases where officers who initially refused bribes eventually gave in after experiencing violence, isolation, or fear for their family's safety. Corruption, in this system, is not optional. It is enforced. And by breaking the will of honest officers, the organization ensures that integrity itself becomes a liability inside Harlem's police force. If buying the police ensured that cases never reached the courtroom, buying the judges ensured that the few cases that did were already lost. The ledgers detail payments to 23 judges across every level of Harlem's court system, each carefully priced according to the power they held over Johnson's fate. Municipal court judges, who handled most gambling and vice charges, received $3,000 every quarter, an annual sum that often matched or exceeded their official salaries. In return, cases were dismissed on technicalities, improper warrants, procedural errors, insufficient evidence arguments that honest judges might overlook, but corrupt ones treated as fatal flaws. When dismissals were impossible, bail was set so low that defendants walked free within hours, or sentences were reduced to fines and probation that meant nothing to the organization. Criminal court judges, dealing with felonies and serious violence, were paid far more $10,000 every quarter. These payments bought the dismissal of major charges before trials could begin, the exclusion of damning evidence, and jury instructions designed to make conviction nearly impossible. Even when convictions could not be avoided, sentences were kept light enough that key operatives returned to work while still young and useful. At the highest level, state Supreme Court justices received their own quarterly payments, ensuring convictions could be overturned, new trials ordered, and civil cases involving competitors resolved in Johnson's favor. Collectively, more than $500,000 a year flowed into the judicial system not to serve justice, but to neutralize it. The courts, once the final safeguard against corruption, had become just another layer of protection. In Harlem, justice was no longer blind. It was bought, scheduled, and delivered on demand. With police silenced and courts neutralized, the final layer of protection was politics. The ledgers show that Johnson's influence did not stop at precinct houses or courtrooms. It extended directly into Harlem's political leadership. City aldermen, state assemblymen, and Democratic Party district leaders all appear on the payment lists, each receiving annual sums calibrated to their influence. Aldermen were paid to shape zoning decisions, licensing approvals, and city services so that Johnson's businesses thrived while competitors were quietly obstructed. Assemblymen were compensated to oppose reform legislation, block tougher gambling laws, and prevent state authorities from interfering in Harlem's affairs. Party district leaders, men who controlled nominations, voter mobilization, and backroom decisions, were paid to ensure that candidates friendly to Johnson rose to power while honest reformers were pushed aside. These payments transformed elections into formalities. Voters still cast ballots, but the outcomes served a single interest. Political clubs became extensions of a criminal enterprise, resolving disputes, suppressing complaints, and redirecting public resources away from citizens and toward protection of illegal operations. When combined with police and judicial corruption, this political layer completed the system. Laws could be written or blocked, enforcement priorities could be reshaped, investigations could be warned off before they even began. By the time federal officials took notice, Harlem's local government was no longer a counterweight to crime, it was a stabilizing force for it. Democracy had not collapsed overnight. It had been quietly absorbed, piece by piece, into a machine that existed to protect one empire. When investigators finally step back and total the numbers, the scale becomes almost impossible to comprehend. The ledgers show that maintaining total control over Harlem costs more than $1 million every year, roughly a quarter of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's estimated $5 million annual income. Nearly $500,000 goes to police, over $500,000 to judges, and hundreds of thousands more to politicians and party leaders. This money buys nothing productive. It builds no businesses, creates no jobs, and improves no lives. It exists solely to purchase permission to keep breaking the law, and keeping this system running requires discipline. On the first day of every month, Johnson's financial manager and his assistants carry out a ritual that looks almost mundane in its confidence. Morning visits to police precincts, where envelopes are handed to captains who then distribute payments down the chain of command. Afternoon stops at courthouses, where judges accept cash between cases and slide it into desk drawers without hesitation. Evening meetings with political officials at clubs, restaurants, and private homes, where bribery is disguised as routine social interaction. It is done openly, in daylight, inside public buildings, because secrecy is no longer necessary. Everyone understands the rules. Reporting the payments would be futile and dangerous. Any complaint would be buried by corrupt superiors, and retaliation would follow swiftly. This monthly ritual reinforces a simple truth. The system does not rely on silence alone, it relies on shared participation. Once everyone is paid, everyone is compromised. And once everyone is compromised, no single person can expose the machine without destroying themselves in the process. What makes Johnson's system nearly untouchable is not just how many people are paid, but how protection is layered. The ledgers reveal a four-stage defense mechanism designed to stop prosecution at multiple points, so even if one layer fails, another catches the threat. The first layer is prevention. Corrupt police officers refuse to investigate complaints, ignore tips, and quietly shut down any inquiry before it can grow into a case. If prevention fails, the second layer activates. Warning. When federal agents plan raids or honest officers stumble onto illegal operations, advance notice, sometimes 24 to 48 hours ahead, is passed directly to Johnson's organization. Evidence is hidden, operations are shut down temporarily, and specific documents are destroyed. The third layer is interference. If arrests still occur, cases are sabotaged from the inside. Evidence disappears between arrest and trial. Suspects are allowed to escape custody. Defense attorneys receive inside information about prosecution strategies. Officers testify about fabricated procedural errors that force dismissals. And if all of that still fails, the final layer waits patiently in the courtroom. Dismissal. Judges exclude evidence, find technical faults, instruct juries in ways that guarantee acquittals, or impose sentences so light they barely interrupt operations. The genius of this system is mathematical. Prosecutors must succeed at every stage: prevention, warning, interference, and dismissal just to secure a conviction. Johnson only needs success at one. The odds are permanently tilted in favor of the criminal enterprise, not because the law is weak, but because it has been quietly rewired to serve the wrong master. The system did not survive on bribery alone. It survived because corruption was enforced with precision. The ledgers and testimony show that Johnson's organization understood a simple rule: money attracts cooperation, but fear guarantees obedience. Officers who accepted payments and proved reliable were rewarded. Monthly envelopes grew larger. Assignments became safer. Promotions came faster. Favorable schedules and preferred posts were quietly arranged by corrupt supervisors who controlled careers from the inside. Corruption became a pathway upward, not a risk. But for those who resisted, pressure escalated quickly. Honest officers were socially isolated, treated as threats to everyone else's income. They were sent on the most dangerous patrols, denied backup in volatile situations, and left exposed until the message was clear. Anonymous threats followed phone calls, warnings, demonstrations of intimate knowledge about home addresses and family routines. In several documented cases, officers who initially refused bribes eventually accepted them after violence, intimidation, or direct threats against their children. The lessons spread fast. Resistance did not lead to reform. It led to injury, fear, or professional ruin. This enforcement mechanism ensured that corruption was no longer a choice, it was the default condition. Over time, even officers who entered Harlem with integrity learned that honesty carried a higher personal cost than compliance. And as fear replaced conscience, the system became self-sustaining. No orders were needed. No reminders were required. Everyone understood the consequences. By the time federal authorities began to take notice, the network had already done its most important work. It had made corruption feel inevitable and resistance feel reckless. By the time the full scope of the corruption becomes clear, the damage has already been done. In Harlem, crime is no longer something that risks punishment, it is something protected by design. Illegal gambling, bootlegging, prostitution, and violence continue openly, not because the law is weak, but because the institutions meant to enforce it have been repurposed. Legitimate businesses cannot compete with operations that enjoy police protection and political favoritism. Residents who are robbed, assaulted, or extorted have nowhere to turn. Knowing that filing a complaint may only invite retaliation, Faith in government erodes quietly, day by day, as people learn that justice is not something they can access. It is something that belongs to those who can afford it. Federal officials reviewing the evidence privately express shock at the scale of the network, but they also acknowledge the reality. Prosecuting hundreds of police officers, dozens of judges, and nearly 50 political figures would require resources and political will far beyond what exists. Witnesses are afraid. Evidence is scarce. Juries may refuse to convict a man many see as a protector rather than a predator. Even if cases move forward, prosecutions would likely be selective, leaving much of the system intact. The ledgers do not just expose corruption, they reveal its permanence. This was not a temporary breakdown. It was a parallel government, built over years, deeply embedded, and fiercely defended. And as long as that system remained in place, Harlem's residents were left with a brutal truth. The law was still there, the courts were still open, elections were still held, but none of it truly belonged to them anymore. The investigation ends, but the questions it raises refuse to disappear. What the ledgers exposed was not simply the rise of a powerful criminal, but the collapse of an entire system meant to protect the public. In Harlem, law enforcement did not fail because it was underfunded or overwhelmed, it failed because it was purchased. Courts did not bend under pressure, they were priced accordingly. Politics did not drift toward corruption by accident, it was absorbed into a machine that rewarded loyalty to money over loyalty to citizens. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson did not conquer Harlem with guns alone. He conquered it with envelopes, schedules, and a deep understanding of how fragile institutions become once everyone is compromised. The most unsettling truth is this: once corruption reaches every layer, there is no clean way to remove it. Anyone who speaks is isolated, anyone who resists is punished, and anyone who benefits has no incentive to change the system. Harlem's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. When justice is treated as a commodity, democracy does not collapse in chaos, it collapses quietly, efficiently, and in plain sight. The question is not whether this system could be dismantled. The question is whether, once built this deeply, it was ever truly meant to be.